In a world full of misery, rage, and insomnia, there's a place you can go to just unwind. All you have to do is take a long walk into the mountains, and just past the black house, the secret garden, you'll find a small cabin. Inside that cabin, you'll find the Hole in the Wall Book Club. So now that the dream catcher's hung and the fire started, we invite you to pull up a chair and join the Losers Club as we explore the world of harmless little tricks and gyrating with Elvis. Hello, and welcome to Hole in the Wall Book Club. I'm Icy. There it is. We did it.
Yeah.
Here's my partner in Not Crimes.
Mark, as usual. And
Mark,
I
as
think,
usual. It's a good name.
ooh, you know what? That's it. We've been talking about my name for like every episode, and it's gonna just Mark as usual.
Perfect. Nailed it.
And I
as
will forget
usual,
Yeah,
we're
I
going
will
to talk
forget
about Needful. I'm going to give up on segues. Segues are weird.
that. All right, so we read it, chapter 5 through 8 inclusive, and I don't know about you, Icy, but I read some interesting things.
There were some interesting things. Yeah. There were some interesting things. There were some needful things. There were
Yes.
things of all types.
See, now that's a good segue.
There it is. We always ruin them by calling them out, though.
Oh, fuck it. I don't care.
Yeah. Let's jump right into it. Chapter 5.
Yeah, man.
I think by now it's clear who our main protagonists here are. It's Alan and Paulie, right?
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. I feel like Alan is your typical like Stephen King good guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
He's got the dead wife. He doesn't write, but he does shadow puppets, and that's basically the same thing. And in this, we find out it's not just shadow puppets. He does magic tricks and weird sleight of hand. He's just an all-around josher.
This is just a really weird thing that Stephen King has added to this character. Because it's like so in depth and it's so much of it. I don't know. There's really not a whole lot to say about it, but yeah, he does shadow puppets. Apparently, the best shadow puppet acting. I don't even know what the correct verb for that is. Shadow puppet display, probably in the world.
Probably,
The
yeah.
way that it's described in the book.
I'm becoming convinced at the end of this book, we've actually already figured it out. See, what's going to happen is Alan's shadow puppets are so realistic that when he shadow puppets one of these dudes, probably Buster Keaton, blowing Mr. Gaunt, he's going to forget his evil plan. And there we go. No one has to drink demon semen, and the plan's fixed. I'm putting all my money on that's how this book ends. A shadow puppet blowing the demon.
I would love to say, well, you're just crazy, but Stephen King endings
But
are
we
not.
both read it.
We did, yeah. Stephen King, as much as we may think that there's no way that the book's going to end like that, Stephen King is not really that great at doing happy endings. So we shall see.
Yep.
I suppose.
But yeah, we start with Alan and Paulie, and they're at the diner, and we basically get this whole thing where Paulie's explaining to Alan, like, yeah, you don't really get this town. Like, this town has secrets, and you're only really just starting to understand how things really happen here.
Right.
And we also from here get her revealing at some point to Alan, hey, I got this letter from Leland Gaunt. And this letter is the most cryptically written thing. It's basically like, hey, I've got things coming in, and I think you're going to like it. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I want you to see it. And they even point, like, there's a point at which Alan's like, so are you going to go check it out? And Paulie's like, well, yeah, it's so cryptic. I have to. It was.
Which I think is genius, by the way.
Right.
Like, there's a part of me really misses this, right? Because we live in a society now where everything is so instant. But I could imagine the sort of excitement and the mystique of just getting this cryptic letter and be like, oh man, like, right, like if he would have said like, hey, I'm getting in like this, and this, you might want to take a look at them. You'd be like, nah, I don't really need any of those things. But just again, like the mystery of it all. There's no way you're not going to go.
Oh yeah, it almost feels like
when one of us inevitably sends the other a message 3 to 5 days before recording saying, "I have so many things to talk about."
Right,
Ugh.
exactly. So she pretty much decides to go, which I think is obvious. And yeah, they have this whole talk, and I think she even brings up like certain things that he just doesn't know about.
Right.
And I think later on in the chapters, I think that uh, he sort of brings up things. Well, first of all, he references two other Stephen King books, right? So at some point, I didn't write it down, but at one point he references, I think it's in chapter 7 actually, but anyway, he references Cujo and he references The Dark Half,
Right.
which coincidentally is the very first Stephen King book I ever read.
The Dark Half.
The Dark Half. That's
And
right.
you kept reading.
I did.
That's one of those ones I read within recent enough memory that I feel pretty confident in my distaste for it.
Well, I think for me it was more of morbid curiosity. Like I read the book and I was like, this is one of the best writers, like modern writers that people like turn to. Like everybody knows who he is. Like this isn't anyway. Neither
Yeah.
here nor there. Maybe we'll cover that one day.
Oof, it'll be a heated season. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we eventually go to Hugh Priest. Now, if you remember Hugh Priest, he is the guy who got the foxtail. He's an alcoholic, and he has this sort of idea that if he got this foxtail, then he could clean up his act. Like he would go to AA, he would turn his life around. Right? He's like, I think he's like 50 something, but he's like,
Right.
no, I could do it. If I just had this foxtail, I could do it. And then this chapter is really interesting because it shows us that he becomes so overprotective over this foxtail where he's like, oh no, I can't even leave my house.
Oh yeah. Like he's thinking about like he gets over the first hurdle being like, well, what are the guys gonna say if I'm the kind of guy who ties a foxtail tail to his antenna of his car, which is what he bought it for. That's what he wants to do with it.
Yeah,
And he
right.
gets over that. He's like, fuck those guys. I don't give a shit about them. But
Yeah.
what if a child steals it? And we've seen this before a little bit with Brian, his baseball card. But this goes to the extreme of, and I'm not leaving the house. Like,
Right. And I think he even says something along the lines of, well, you know how kids are these days. You know, it's like they just steal anything or something along those lines. And yeah, he's so sort of enchanted by this thing that he can't even leave.
yeah, if
Right.
I'm remembering right, this whole section ends with him sitting in his chair holding the foxtail in one hand and a gun in the other in case someone tries to steal it. I
Right.
might be misremembering that, but I'm pretty sure that's how this one ended.
It was either a gun or a drink. I honestly can't remember, but yeah, you're along the right lines, I guess.
Yeah.
Then we go from there. I mean that's like a short sort of section of the chapter. Then we're literally going to go to I think the part that I'm actually the most excited to talk about.
Oh, this bit was intense.
So
We
we get
catch him back up
to
with Wilma Jerzik. By the way, I actually paid attention during the audiobook, Jerzik. At least that's how the
okay,
narrator says it.
right.
So if I'm wrong, at him.
Yeah, right. Now here's the deal. What Stephen King does here is he makes sure he ensures that you know as the reader that Wilma is the worst fucking person on the planet.
Oh yeah. And
Right?
this is something Stephen King is really good at. When he has a character that he wants you to hate, or he wants you to be so overjoyed when bad things happen to, he will make you feel that.
Right. And it gets to the point where she's describing, and I never thought I would do this on this podcast, but there actually is something that I want to read verbatim because there's no way I can do it justice. Now, she's going on and on about her views about her husband and marriage and things like that. And this is verbatim to the book. She believed in her heart that marriage was a lifetime adventure in aggression and in such a long campaign where ultimately no prisoners could be taken, no quarter given, no patch. of marital landscape left unscorched. Such easy victories might eventually lose their savor. Wow.
Right? Okay, kicker. I marked that exact passage in my book because I want to read this verbatim. It's such a
Oh,
powerful line. Yeah, so we get Wilma coming home, and we as the readers know, like the last thing that happened over at the Jerzik's house is Brian covering the sheets in mud.
yep.
But we meet Wilma's husband, Pete, and Pete is a broken man. Like Wilma
Oh,
has
yeah.
taken great pride in how she has just destroyed this man and bent her to all of her wishes.
Yeah, the amount of pride that oozes from every single word is like, I was like super uncomfortable. I was like, you know
Mhm.
what? Okay, so maybe it's not so bad to be single. Like,
Yeah.
like
So
Jesus.
this whole thing all starts when basically we get the list of everything Pete's done. He's started dinner, he's cleaned up inside the house, and he's sitting on the couch watching some TV or just chilling on the couch. And Wilma asked, "Hey, did you bring in the laundry?" And Pete was like, "No, I forgot. I'm so sorry." And that's when we get this like she just tears into him about it. And as she's walking out to get the laundry, we get her internal thoughts of, I actually enjoy bringing in the laundry. I like the feel of the linen on my skin and the fresh air. I really enjoy it. I'll never tell him that because now that I've crushed his spirits about a minor task that I wanted to do that he forgot to do, he's going to suck up to me. He's going to have dinner on the table. He's going to clean up everything. And then the thing that got me was, and he's going to listen to everything I want to say without saying a word about his day. And I hate what he does for a living. It's boring, and I don't want to hear it.
Right. And like she even goes on to this whole thing about, well, the great thing about him forgetting the laundry is that I'm going to break him sooner tonight. And she goes into this whole thing about like, she's like, well, sometimes it takes like hours. And it's, she's like so disgusted by it. She's like, yes, tonight's a victory because I've already broken him down and I just got home.
Yep.
I'm like, fuck. Like,
Yep.
Jesus.
So this sets us up for when she steps outside. It's like twilight. And she's like, wait, where the hell are the sheets? She can't see them. And then she
Yep.
hears them flapping in the wind. And then one of them slaps against her face, but it's dark. She doesn't know what it is. And she freaks out because she just had this
Mhm.
wet, muddy thing slap her in the face. And it is a joyous moment when she experiences pure terror. Like, as the reader, you're like, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
right.
And she goes, once she gets a grip on what's happening, Pete comes out, turns on the lights. She's fallen. She's covered in mud. She flips, explodes into anger. And then she hears a dog barking, which leads her to a train of thought of, wait, what bitch do I know who has a dog? This was
Right.
Nettie.
Mm-hmm.
And we jump back to she thinks back to the moment we had in our last section when both of them were in Needful Things and Nettie gave her a scowl and ran out. And she's
Right.
like, yep, that reminded her that we had a feud and it's her fault. She did this.
And it's weird too because I think she even brings up in this chapter where I guess I don't know if it's in this chapter or later on where she goes into the backstory of this feud.
I think it's split up a bit, but yeah, we can get into that now.
So yeah, basically Nettie had a puppy that barked all the time, and Wilma became furious about it and eventually threatened to basically kill her dog if she didn't
Yep.
shut it up. And eventually the dog sort of grew up and it didn't really become a problem or became less of a problem. But the thing that's crazy is she even says in here, she's like, well, I'm really glad all that happened because I was kind of bored and I needed a good feud.
Oh yeah. She even admits openly to herself, the dog didn't even really bother me that much. I
Yeah,
just needed an enemy. Like what
yeah.
this summer
Oh
really needs is an arch nemesis.
God, this is why Netflix is a very good thing.
So this leads to Wilma giving Nettie a call.
Yep.
And hold on, I'm getting myself confused.
I think we actually are getting into a little bit of a lot of what I think I said is also in chapter 6, but again, the way this book is written, that's just going to happen a lot. So
Yeah. Yeah. And so jumping into a bit of this call, basically, and we're skipping around a bit here, but Wilma calls Nettie to terrorize her. Like,
Right.
I think that there's a moment there where she's pretty sure it's Nettie, but not positive. But she's like, I'm going to terrorize her.
So yeah, she calls Nettie to, like you said, like to absolutely terrorize her. And I would disagree. Like when I'm reading this, Wilma seems 100% convinced that it's definitely Nettie. And I don't remember the exact language that she uses, but it is definitely threatening. It's definitely like, hey, I know you did this, and like we're on now.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Like, you better watch yourself. You never know when or where. Like,
Exactly. And again, reminding everyone that Nettie has had her own sort of trials and tribulations, right? She's already sort of trying to recover from like
stabbing her
uh
husband through the throat while he's asleep with a salad fork.
right, after like years of abuse, and she's sort of really twitchy and things like that. So again, she's just very weak sort of psychologically because everything she's been through. And that sort of leads us into, all right, actually, I don't know if we want to talk about this, but the very end of chapter 5 is Norris Ridgwick, who is the sort of the deputy. He finds like the fishing pole that his dad used to have at Needful Things.
Yep. We get a short scene there. Yeah.
Right. So then chapter 6, which I self-titled, by the way, which is Wilma and Nettie feud.
Yeah. No, that's the core of that.
Right.
We start out by learning a little bit more about Pete. We find out that, yes,
really good.
Pete is a broken man, but he's not quite as broken as we think. He is fighting back against his wife a little bit because at some point, Pete realized my work is really stressful, and he went to a doctor, and the doctor prescribed him Xanax. But we get a little bit of the internal thoughts of the doctor, who's like, "Yeah, I'm giving this dude Xanax because it's not his work. He would be so much less stressed if he literally never left his building. His wife is a grade A bitch, and everyone knows it."
Yeah, he's basically like, dude, you should sleep at work. You'd feel much better.
Oh yeah,
Don't
and like,
ever leave.
to further reiterate Wilma's complete, I don't care about what my husband does in the least. Pete keeps his Xanax in his briefcase because he knows for a fact Wilma will never look in it because she finds his job so boring. And
Yeah, this is just another thing where you find out just how unsupportive she is. I mean, not like you need it anymore at this point
yeah,
anyway, but she was like, like Pete was kind of like, well, I'll never live it down. If she ever finds out that I'm taking something like this, she just won't allow it. Like, period.
yep. And then
Which it's
somehow
so interesting, but yeah.
somehow Stephen King has made a character so terrible that within 30 pages of really meeting them for the first time, I am completely okay finding out that her husband has drugged her several times.
Oh yeah. So
I
yeah,
was just like, yeah, that makes sense.
right. We get into it. He finally figures out the best thing that he can do is crush up his anti-anxiety meds and give it to his wife.
Yep,
Every
he puts
time
it in her tea.
right, every time she's on this huge spell.
There
Or
was a point at which, like, she had this huge fight with her hairdresser because her hairdresser messed up her perm, and he she was going on this rant about, I'm gonna go over there and I'm gonna fix it, and like once once I'm done with her, she'll have to get a seeing eye dog. And
Mhm.
he's like, whoa, are you all right? Can you maybe calm down and think about it? And she's like, if you stand in my way, you're gonna have to get a seeing eye dog from the same person. And so he
Right.
puts some Xanax in her tea and leaves in the morning, like before she wakes up, and spends the entire day being certain that she was gonna go out and kill this woman. Like,
Yeah.
he's like, I'm gonna come home, find out that this hairdresser's dead, my wife's in jail, and he comes home and finds out the Xanax worked. She was like, I wasn't quite as angry about it when I woke up. Oh, it's fine.
Right, like you're saying, like in these 30 pages, because we've seen Wilma previously in the story, and it's kind of one of those things where you're like, all right, I get sort of a weird vibe from her. Like she doesn't really
Mhm.
seem that nice. But in these 30 pages, you're like, oh wow, she literally takes pride in destroying people.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
who she is. So you're right. So by this point, when you find out that her husband's like drugging her, you're like, yeah, okay.
Maybe
That's
more often, bro. And I want to make it very clear. I am firmly anti-drugging people without their knowledge. I want to make that very clear. I don't want anything misconstrued.
yeah, right.
Unless you're married to Wilma Jerziks, then drug
Right.
away. Do
And
what
first
you
of all,
gotta do, bro.
we're not talking about we're literally talking about an anti-anxiety med, and there's actually no sort of mention in here that like he's giving her like a double dose or anything. Like, no, he's just giving her a regular dose of anti-anxiety meds. That's it.
Except he finally did that night. He gave her 2 Xanax the night of the sheets. After she
right.
makes the call to Nettie. So she calms down a little, and so she decides, well, okay, instead of whatever nebulous, probably gonna try and kill Nettie thing I was gonna do, I'm just gonna terrorize her openly. And this is interspersed through our next little sections, but like Wilma drives by her house, honks her horn, like screams at her house, sees the curtains twitch, and like I think swings by another time randomly and starts honking. Just no, and very much acknowledging Nettie's got mental issues. She is a super anxious person. I'm gonna break her mind, like straight up
Right.
psychological warfare.
Yeah, right. There's a point where she's like sitting outside of her house, and she thinks that she sees like the blinds or the curtains moving, and she's like, "Oh, is that it?" And then she sees it again. And she's like, "Oh yeah, I know I know what I saw. She sees me out here, so I'm gonna keep like driving around just to drive her crazy."
Oh yeah,
Which
and
100% works, by the way.
oh yeah, I mean, especially like we're gonna bring in the fact that we had just in this last chapter gotten the scene with Hugh Priest getting obsessed about protecting this foxtail. So now we've got Nettie, who is an anxious person, has just purchased something from Needful Things, and
Right.
is being terrorized by Wilma. And that all hits together at once.
Now, here's the most interesting thing about this part. Now, I don't know for anyone listening and Icy, I don't know how you feel, but I have anxiety as well. And the next part of this book it triggered my anxiety so much it was actually hard to read, because basically what Stephen King does here is like Nettie locks her house and she leaves. She gets like, I don't know, like a little bit away, and she's like, "Oh, I need to make sure that I lock the house." So she
Right.
goes back and she's like, "Okay, I locked it." Then she walks down the street further and she's like, "But did I lock it?"
Yeah, we get a quick scene where she like hides the carnival glass in a cabinet in her shed. And like there's this moment where she's like, "Oh, I almost turned on the lights, but I'm not going to turn on the lights. I'm not letting that crazy Polish woman trick me. She's going to be watching, know where I hid it."
Right,
So,
but Stephen King goes in this great detail about her checking the locks like 10 times.
oh yeah.
By the end of that, I was like, I need a Xanax myself, because I actually do this in real life. It drives me crazy. When I go to sleep at night, I check my front door like 7 times. And eventually I just give up. I'm like, I lay in bed and I'm like, I want to go check again. And I'm like, no, because I'm going to go crazy.
Yep.
So this part hit me so hard. Anyway, sorry, you're right. So that's all personal stuff. But eventually, yeah,
I overshare here all the time.
yeah, right. So eventually, you're right though. She gets super paranoid about the carnival glass lampshade. She she goes into this whole bit where she's like, okay, well, I'll hide it in the shed. I'm gonna hide it in this like locked part of the shed. So then that increases her anxiety even more, because now she has to go back to the shed several times to make sure that's
Oh yeah,
locked.
there's this beautiful scene where like she just came back to the house to check the front door, and then she walks back out again. She's like, "Ooh, but I should check the shed door," and goes back and checks to make sure the cabinet's locked, make sure the shed's locked. Starts walking, goes, "Wait, but did I leave the front door unlocked when I went to check on the shed?" And it's this loop, which eventually leads to her calling into work, saying she's not feeling well, and
Right.
basically just sitting there with the carnival glass in one hand and the dog at her feet.
Right. And again, this is where you talked about the sort of the I guess the comparison to Hugh Priest, right? Who's
Mm-hmm.
pretty much doing the same thing.
I
So
mean,
Mike,
and also like to an extent, Brian, just
oh right.
from a child view. Like, because we get
So
this bit where Brian snaps at his brother, I believe, because his brother like comes in the room to like see if he wants to go play, and he flips out because he thinks his brother's trying to steal his card.
So my question to you is this, and you're right, Brian. He's the first example where he obsesses over. He even says like he gets up in the middle of the night just to check on this
Oh
card.
yeah, and I think the thing that was weird about that is it didn't hit that hard until we see the adults doing it too.
Yeah, I think a part of this is like, okay, he's a kid. He's like, he got this great deal. He doesn't understand it. Now he's like a little paranoid that he did something wrong or whatever. And now you're seeing the adults do it, and you're like, okay, this is serious. So the interesting thing about this, though, is how much of this do you think is sort of the quote unquote Leland Gaunt magic, and how much of it do you think is just sort of consumerism at its finest? Because what Stephen King is doing here is he's saying that, you know, Leland Gaunt at Needful Things is giving you like the number one thing that you want,
And
right?
not just want, the number one thing you think you need.
Right.
It's exactly what you need to change your life or whatever.
And Nettie has an amazing example because she even says, and I don't know if it's here or what chapter it's in, but she even talks about how the last straw, she had put up for being abused for years. The last straw was when her husband broke her carnival glass. That was it.
Yep.
That's when she stabbed and killed him.
And we get her while she's sitting in that chair thinking and talking straight up to her dog, being like, you know, I'm not going to let her hurt you. I'm not going to let her break my lampshade. I'll do what I have to.
Right.
And I mean, it's exactly the kind of thing we were seeing Hugh Priest going through. It's building this powder keg. And to answer your question, I don't know. I really could see this being just, this is the thing that they want so much that they're willing to do anything to protect it. And this is where I think I touched on this last time. I get a little worried about Stephen King because I feel like he sometimes clouds his themes by introducing ambiguous power. Like, I can't tell if Leland Gaunt is hypnotizing people and like taking away their control of their lives or just offering them a deal. And those are two very different stories.
And I think you're right, but I think ultimately here, what Stephen King, and I think it's obvious, or maybe not, maybe you disagree, but I think Stephen King is obviously writing this book about our obsession with materialistic sort of things, right?
Right.
And I don't know when this book was written.
91, I think, was publishing.
All right, so 91, and I would say it's much worse today compared to
92.
30 years
There
ago.
we go.
So I think that's the theme. Like Leland Gaunt is really well, I was gonna say he's Amazon, but I think that's a little extreme. But basically, like Stephen
He's
King
not
is
that
basically
evil.
right. Oh, okay. But no, like Stephen King is making a point. Like people are way too obsessed with material things. And I think what he's trying to do here is he's trying to make it a point where he believes, this is Stephen King, believes that people are so bad now, and this is 92, where people are literally willing to like sell a portion of their soul just to get the material thing that they want. And I think he's making a good point here.
I
And yes,
agree, but I still think the like hints of like mind clouding, mind control-ish stuff from Gaunt weakens that theme a bit. But we'll see. I'm trying to withhold judgment.
no, I think you're right. And I think it's and this is why I asked the question, right? Because I just don't know how much of this is driven by personal greed versus Leland Gaunt, which is we have a lot of evidence to suggest that he's some sort of supernatural being of some kind. Yeah, I just don't know where that balance of power is
It kind
just
of
yet.
feels similar to me to my feelings on the Shining movie. Not to the same extreme, but the whole like, it feels like he was insane from the moment he stepped into the hotel. So did he ever have a chance to fight against it? And it feels a little bit like that to me, but we'll see.
Yeah. All right, so I guess we'll jump into chapter 7, which again is another chapter I think is very interesting. So chapter 7, we start out with Cora Rusk, I think her name is, and she is the mother of Brian, who we were just talking about, who had like the baseball card.
Mm-hmm.
And she is like devastated by the fact that the Elvis Presley picture has already been sold, but Leland Gaunt has, I guess, Elvis Presley's like pair of sunglasses or whatever.
Yep.
And
One
instead
of
of
many,
trading
but he was told they're his favorites.
right, I think he said like one of like 40 or 50 or something, so
Yeah.
an exclusive item. And instead of a deal, he's kind of like, hey, I need info on like someone who can watch the sheriff. And this is the first time, I think, where we get this sort of indication that Leland Gaunt is actually worried about someone.
Right. Yeah, he calls the sheriff, was it a hard sell?
Right. He doesn't like a hard sell. He even says that.
Yep. And Cora suggests Paulie, because Paulie's sweet on him. And Gaunt's just like, no, that won't do. Doesn't give an explanation, just that won't do. And eventually the suggestion comes up of Eddie Warburton, I think is his last name, who is the janitor at the
Right.
police station.
And I think that Cora brings up like it's definitely not just Polly. It's like 2 or 3 people.
Yeah,
And he's
she
like,
brings
no,
up
that won't
the
do. That won't
secretary
do.
at the police
So
station.
my theory here is that he cannot have anyone who's emotionally invested in the sheriff.
Yeah, that would make sense because he also calls the secretary a hard sell.
Right. Exactly.
But he doesn't for Polly.
Doesn't for Polly, but also says she won't do. And
Right.
I think it's because they're in this sort of romantic relationship. So he knows that he's not going to be able to get enough leverage over
Right.
her. Yeah, deal. And then there's like this weird paragraph where they cover Leland Gaunt. It's like literally like one paragraph, I think, deals or 20 deals or something like that. And the reason why I like that so much is because Stephen King is doing a few things here. The first thing he's doing is he's showing
Right.
you that Leland Gaunt is making deals pretty much to everybody in the town. The second thing that he's showing you, at least that I believe, is that he's like, okay, this is where the story is going to change. Because I've showed you all of the deals before, and this is interesting. It's now time to start, I guess, the next part of this story.
We get details on 3 of the deals, but they're all very, very quick. Like, we know Miss Radcliffe, the speech teacher, bought the splinter and is supposed to play a prank on the principal. And I might, at this point, before the next episode, make up a nice little conspiracy board and put a picture of it in the show notes because it's getting hard to keep track of who's owing what. And I think I'm finally going to break down and do it. Yeah.
Oh, I've given up. But if you make the board, then power to you. We'll talk about it.
Cindy Rose from the very beginning comes in to get the other vase, and he's like, "Yeah, you know what? Just take it. Don't worry about paying me. Just play a trick on the deputy." So Norris, and we get Everett Frankie, or who I legitimately don't remember who it is, buys a pipe and agrees to play a trick on Sally Radcliffe. Those are the 3 we get by name.
Right, and then again, it gives you sort of this whole list of deals that he's made. And again, I actually really like this because it for those 2 points, like he's saying, like, hey, Leland Gaunt's doing really good. Second thing is it's time to sort of move this story on to sort of the next thing. If that makes, like, I'm not explaining
especially
this
with
well,
some confirmation we get later in these chapters, it puts a timeline on it, and it gives me a lot of hope that we're gonna have pretty good pacing here. Because like by the end of these chapters, we have a pretty hard timeline on some shit's going down by this day, and that day is not that far off.
Right. Yep. Okay.
We
so
go to
that,
Alan and Polly's date, which has a really intense sex scene. And I don't know why.
Right.
I'm not a huge fan of explicit sex scenes in books in general, but every time Stephen King does one, it makes me wildly uncomfortable.
Yeah, right. I don't know what, dude. I could not agree with you more on everything that you just said. I'm not really. Again, I could just say the exact same thing coming from me. I don't think that extremely explicit sex scenes really ever add that much. Sometimes they're kind of hot. Sometimes you're just like, okay. They almost never add to the story. But when Stephen King does one, be ready to feel uncomfortable because
Yeah,
I
like
promise
I
it will
don't.
happen.
I mean, on top of the like general, I don't really need an explicit sex scene here. I absolutely don't need an explicit sex scene where one of the people keeps describing how the other one moves like a giant cat and it turns them on. Like
Isn't that the best?
apparently, on top of
Right.
being a shadow puppet wizard, a street magician, he just moves like a big sexy cat. So like he's basically a sexy David Blaine cat man who can do shadow puppets. And I have never
Right.
been less erect, actually.
Yeah, like, but again, this is our Stephen King hero,
Yep.
right? He can just
He
do it
could
all.
do it all while
So
looking like a sexy cat. But I think the key bits about through this is we find out that Alan and Polly are they really do love each other. And in a way that feels kind of real. I keep comparing this back to our relationship between I don't remember Susan and the lead characters of Salem's Lot, where the only reason you would ever buy that they cared about each other is because they keep talking about how it felt like fate that they loved each other.
yeah, it was very
Right.
shallow, sort
But
of.
as uncomfortable as this made
Like
me, it felt
in that
real.
case, right? In that Salem's Lot case, it's like Stephen King is like, yeah, they love each other because I'm
Right.
telling you they do. In this case, like it's actually sort of real. And again, we're looking at sort of many years of Stephen King getting matured in his
Yeah.
writing
So
here.
like now
So
it's no longer telling me they love each other. It's showing me they love each other in a really uncomfortable way, which is still technically an improvement. But
hey man, at least it wasn't like The Shining where it was like, oh yeah, like let's bring up his dried
uh
seed
we
multiple
have a lot of book
times.
left. Don't bet on that pony yet.
Yeah,
Uh
that's
but we also
true.
learned we learn how Alan's wife and kids died. A kid died. And
Yeah, and this is, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this part justice, but
I don't think we can. We're just gonna tell you the basics of what happened, but this part was really well written. Like it felt real and visceral. And
right.
basically, we find out that Alan's wife had a brain tumor. No one knew about it. Alan is basically beating himself up because he thinks he should have noticed something was wrong because of how much, I believe it was aspirin she was taking. It was something like realizing that she had taken around 120 aspirin in was a couple weeks.
I think it was literally a week.
Ah, okay. Because of her head.
I could
pains.
be wrong. Yeah.
And it basically boils down to like they went to see a doctor. The doctor thought it was okay, and then his wife and his kid, or his youngest kid, went to the mall, and she just drove off the road, hit something, and they died. They found that she wasn't wearing her seatbelt, and Alan gets really stuck on this, being like she's always like she was obsessive about that.
Yeah, she's adamant.
And then they found the brain tumor in autopsy. And basically, his thing he can't let go of is that he's a cop. He should have noticed something was wrong, and he should have been able to stop this. And this is when we get that, like, I can't hear you. You aren't coming through Discord. Yeah, I can hear you again.
I don't know what the deal with that was. Seems like my Discord breaks at least once every
Yeah,
second.
it's tradition.
Right. We're used to it. Got to keep your editing skills in check. Anyway, so God, I forgot what I was thinking about. Okay, so this is really interesting too because it was briefly said in one of the earlier chapters that the only person that could lie to him was his widowed wife, I guess.
Mhm.
And when we're talking about the aspirin, it's a thing where he finally brings it up to his wife, and she's like, "Oh, Alan, like you have nothing to worry about. Like, yes, I have been taking aspirin for headaches, but I opened the bottle and I dropped it, and most of them went down the sink." And like this is part of him killing himself over this because he's like, "I will never make that mistake again."
Right.
Because I know now that was and right, we're getting a very in-depth detail, and he's even to the point where he's like, I can't even imagine this thought they bring it up, and I guess it was either the doctor or somebody was like, yeah, like your young son may have actually still been alive after the crash, but like the car was on fire and he probably died that way.
Yeah.
And it's that, and it's like this, and he's like going through again, just like killing himself over this idea that I should have known something. And I trusted her so much, and I just should have known. And like he's going over like that morning and the few weeks before, and the grief is so real here, and you can really feel it, and you can really, even though I hope that no one has had to go through this, it's weird because you can relate to it. You can relate to sort of this idea that this traumatic thing happened in your life, and you're like, was there something I could have done? Did I miss something?
Yeah, because he goes on this part where he basically does research on brain tumors and finds the seatbelt thing combined with the brain tumor thing brings this thought to mind that she might have committed suicide, that this was something she did on purpose and took their kid with her. And
Right.
he's so fixated on, if I had noticed, he wouldn't have died.
Right.
And, it is powerful.
Right. There's no, again, we can't do it justice. This part, when you're reading it, yeah, it's hard. This is hard to read.
Which is super weird because it comes after one of the most awkward sex scenes I've ever read.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we do sort of get and sort of segue out of this just a little bit. This is all he brings up, this brief sort of thing, and I know we just talked about this earlier, but I think this is where it's actually written, where this was also during a time where he was also like questioning reality or something, and
it
referencing,
was happening during the dark half, because I believe he is the cop in the dark half.
And this is crazy because never in my life, I'm 34 now, never ever did I think that I was ever going to say, I kind of want to read the dark half again.
I know. I think I've said that on this podcast, that I don't want to read the dark half again, ever. I'm pretty sure that was one of the ones that I said, I will not do that book. And I might be taking it back. That will not change for Under the Dome, making that clear now.
That's not going to change for me either. But this chapter makes me curious. And now, mind you, I haven't read Cujo at all. I've never read Cujo, and I've never seen the movie. But this really did make me want to say, like, shit, I need to read Cujo, and I need to revisit the dark half, because
you got us, Stevie Kings. You got us.
Yeah, damn it! Like you're selling 2 more books after this one as well. Like, damn you! So,
if I remember right, Cujo is on the shorter side. I think that's in like close to Carrie size. So that'll be a quick one.
So I'll talk about this in depth. I'm not gonna say if. I feel like it's now to the point where it's just a win we do Cujo.
Yeah.
But I actually do have a fear of dogs, so I'm already terrified to read that book.
It'll be a good one. It's like me. With Dreamcatcher, I have a fear of getting an alien butt worm, so I'm right there with you, buddy.
That just sounds like a good time. But anyway,
yeah.
All right. I think that's all I have for chapter 7.
Yeah, and going into chapter 8, most of chapter 8 focuses on us learning about Keaton, Danton Keaton, and Danton Keaton has some secrets.
He does.
It turns out that was foreshadowing. Yeah, he is a corrupt town selectman.
Yep, got into gambling. Kind of big
on them horses, real Bukowski figure.
Right.
Actually, the thing is, he isn't though. Up until the very first time he gambles, he is rigidly clean. Like,
straight arrow, big time. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's when he eventually gets on he becomes one of the selectmen, and the head selectman of the town is kind of in line for retirement, and he goes to the racetracks with this guy to try and schmooze him a bit.
Right, he's just like classic brown nosing here, right? I think he's like third selectman, and like the second guy is like not sort of motivated at all.
Yeah.
right? He makes this point where he's like, yeah, the second selectman doesn't matter, but I actually have hopes and dreams. And yeah, they go to the racetrack, and he's like, not even, he's just like, whatever. Like, he's being dragged to this thing just so he can brown nose.
Yeah. And the guy forces him to place a bet. Like, Keaton doesn't know how to bet. He walks up, he's like, this horse. And they're like, to win, place, or show. And he's like, win? I don't know what those other words mean.
I know what win means, so we'll do that one.
And he falls in love. Like, the moment the horse is off.
Yeah, right. And the thing that gets him is he wins his first bet.
Yep.
And it's like a 30-1 shot. And I think he walked into this thing with like $5.
Yeah, he plays like a $2 bet, I think.
Right, and then he goes home with like $300.
Oh yeah, and he's hooked. Yeah, have I ever told you about the first time I ever gambled?
No,
it's a pretty good one. So, I got a job at a 5-spot, which, for those who don't know, in West Virginia, you can have 5 slot machines in a building without having a full gaming license. So people will build these tiny, tiny buildings that are basically 5 slot machines and someone there to change out money and give you drinks. And my job was to change out money and give people drinks.
Okay.
I'm bipolar as fuck. And I was like, you know what? I'm setting myself up. I have an addictive personality. I'm setting myself up. I'm going to go in on a day when I'm pretty level, and I'm going to take $20 and I'm going to lose it. I'm going to put it in that slot machine. And I'm going to keep going until I lose it. I'm going to build a bad taste for gambling. Well, I kept pressing that button, and at about $200 up, I was like, I cannot morally do this. I am so poor that I have to cash out. This is significantly changing the next several months of my life.
Right.
And that is how I backfired badly with that plan.
Well, but again, and this is like the same thing too, right? In the book, because here's the deal. If he would have lost that bet, I get the feeling that he would have enjoyed it, but I'm not quite sure it would have been sort of a major part of his life.
Right. And it becomes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just the magic of him on his very first try, placing down $5 and walking away with 300. And just that feeling, that rush, and he's like talking about the crowd. I gamble in real life as well. I haven't in a while. But I love craps. And a lot of the feeling that he was talking about with betting on horses is sort of how I feel with craps. I'm just not addicted to it, so I can control it most.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, until you go be a caretaker at a craps hotel.
Yeah.
Then we'll see. We'll see.
Hopefully it's called the Overlook.
But Keaton is addicted, and it is definitely taking control of his life. We see like this slow slipping he's done from like, okay, I lost too much money. I'm going to take some out of the town petty cash so that my wife doesn't get on me. So she'll only think I lost a little, and I'll pay it back when I win. And it just slowly gets to a point where he's taken more and more money, and his wife knows he likes to gamble, but he only ever loses a little bit. He wins a little bit. It's not a big problem. It's just, she just thinks of this is his entertainment budget. This is what he does instead of going to the bar. That's fine. But slowly he has just been embezzling from the town over and over. And he's starting to get letters from the main state government. You're being audited. Send us these. And these are getting less and less nice and more formal, like to the town selectman. Now it's just like, or like, you know, to Mr. Keaton, the town select. Now it's just to the town selectman. You just boom,
right,
fucking do these things.
And here's the crazy thing, and he is very anti. He's like calling them the persecutors, and like he's getting super I don't know the word for it. He's getting super defensive and sort of blaming other people, like, oh, why are they persecuting me? Stuff like, you know who this reminds me of, right?
A little bit of Jack, just a little bit.
Exactly. When I was reading this, I was like, oh, okay, so this is Jack Torrance in this book
with more paranoia. Like he's checking the mirror in his room to make sure they haven't put a camera behind it and replaced it with a one-way mirror.
Right. Exactly. And it's all this sort of arc where you literally have done all of this yourself and you blame the world for it.
Right.
It's everyone else's fault. none of yours, even though it's literally all of yours.
Yep.
So
We find out that he is the only one in the town that knows about this. Everything that he has sent to them correspondence-wise, he has typed himself and signed his secretary's, like, oh, what's that word? Signed the signature his secretary uses when she takes dictation from him.
Yep.
And kind of justifies it to himself, being like, oh, there's no one else's issue. I can do this. It's still coming from my office. I'm allowed to put her name on that. And we get a timeline on it. I think it's like 5 days or something. He has less than a week before this audit's happening.
Right. Which we both know is like, there's no way that he's going to pass this audit.
Oh, yeah. And he knows it too.
Right.
And this is early, like so late it's early, basically, at this point. And he locks up his office, locks all these files in a special drawer that no one else is looking in. And he's kind of wandering through town, thinking about, all these persecutors against him, and ends up at Needful Things.
Our best shop in the world.
And sitting in the window, wouldn't you know it, it's a electronic, or like a robotic, sorry, it's one of those like old metal toys with racehorses called winning ticket.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah, right. So, and he goes in, and Leland Gaunt sort of, like, I just want to point out here that I guess nothing has changed. Leland Gaunt has a lot of charm. When you touch him, you feel this sort of revulsion, sort of like it's this disgusting feeling.
Yep.
Keaton feels all these things as well. Nothing has changed here. But Leland Gaunt is pretty much saying, like, hey man, there's this myth that bettors used to use this game, and they used to name all the horses that were the real names in the races, and they used to run this game to place all their bets. And this is an interesting thing, because Leland Gaunt's like, hey man, I'm not going to charge you for this, really. Let me know if it works, and then maybe we.
Oh, and very much commiserates with Keaton. Like, there's a bit where he basically says, yeah, I have a gambling problem too. Like, not in those words, but makes it clear we are the same. And even brings up, like, kind of hints at the persecution and the timelines, like, fix this.
Right. I think he says something along the lines of like, now, I don't remember Keaton ever bringing it up, but Leland Gaunt just sort of brings up, he's like, hey, I know how you feel when I guess the town is against you, or they're coming after you. I've only been in town for a few days, and I can already feel the same thing.
Right. And there was a point near the end of Keaton's rant when the persecutors and everyone against him becomes them. And he keeps using them to be like the big other evils. And
Right.
Leland Gaunt, you start using that same them as those othered. And this scene was good. Like, this felt like the least magic manipulation Gaunt has done that we've seen so far.
Yeah, this is just straight up like, I guess social engineering in a way. I mean, obviously there's some magic in here to where you can tell that Leland Gaunt knows a little bit more
Right.
than he would if he was just like, a human. But yeah, he just basically uses that knowledge to sort of, I guess, bend Keaton to his wheel, or his sort of will. And he knows that the winning ticket's going to work.
Right.
And this is so interesting, is I wonder how Leland Gaunt intends to use him.
Right. And the thing is, though, I'm going to jump ahead, because the very end of this chapter, we see Keaton basically lock himself in his office at his house.
Yep.
And we get a bit through his wife, who's been hearing this mechanical buzz the whole time. She's like, man, is my husband just in there, the vibrator all no. But it ends with Keaton basically having run winning ticket on every single race that day. And he's like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to fix my problem, and heads off to the racetrack. And
Right.
we don't see if this works yet, but if it does, which it's going to.
Yeah, right. I feel like it has to, right?
Keaton
no story
is
here.
putty in Gaunt's hands.
Exactly.
Gaunt can ask him for literally anything.
Yep. So a few things that we sort of skipped over. So Keaton gets the winning ticket, this board game or whatever, and the sheriff tries to come to the shop. And
Right before then, though, I think we get a quick scene with Alan, and I think it's Norris talking in the office. And I
Yeah.
don't think what they're talking about is super consequential, but Alan mentions, "Well, I'm gonna head over to Needful Things and check it out."
Yep.
And we see Eddie, the janitor, um, as soon as they leave the sheriff station, run off to a phone.
Exactly. Sort of giving Leland Gaunt the heads up. Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, we have this whole scene where Leland quickly, I guess, changes the shop to closed or whatever. Sheriff Alan Pangborn or something.
Yep.
He's like checking it out. There's this weird sort of scene where the sheriff is like looking really closely at the window, and like Leland's like, "Can he see me? Like, what's going on?"
Yeah, it's implied that Leland is straight up invisible. Like, I'm pretty sure it might explicitly say, like, he's just standing in the shop watching Alan look through the window, and it makes mention that, like, he's translucent or can't be seen, and there's this moment of, like, surprise and recognition. Alan, like, steps back, and Leland's like, "How could he see me?" And then realizes what happened, and we get the whole thing from, Alan's perspective, and he basically thought he saw something, but it was his own reflection.
Right, which I thought was pretty cool to
Yeah.
see this same scene from two different perspectives. Because, again, at this point, we know main antagonist and main protagonist, right? So it was very cool to see the scene played out in both
Oh,
those,
yeah. And
perspectives.
within this and a little bit from, the section before with Keaton, we kinda get what I think is the pressure cooker timeline, because this is on, I believe, a Friday, and Alan leaves his business card. He writes something on it, leaves it in the door, and when Gaunt retrieves the card, it basically says like, "Hey, I was coming by to say hi. I'll be back again on Monday to say hi," or whatever. And it was very
Yep.
friendly written, but
Yeah,
Gaunt looks at it and basically thinks to himself, "All right, well, before the end of the weekend, you're gonna have too much in your hands to worry about coming back to me." Which where
exactly.
I, as a reader, was like, "Oh, thank God. We have a timeline. That timeline is close. Oh, crap. We might have good pacing." I'm so terrified that nothing happens until part 3 of this book. And then it happens in the very end and then ends.
Or even
But
part 4, right? It's
yeah.
like it's just at the very end. And again, super important thing here. The sheriff puts his card under here. Leland Gaunt is grabbing it and reading it, and then he basically just sprouts fire from his hand to burn this card.
Yep.
So this is the first time that we've seen sort of, I guess, direct magic from Leland. I
Yeah,
mean,
and
it's
which
heavily
makes me
implied.
think which makes me think he was actually invisible, because that would be to see him, like, to do the whole, like, yeah, he can't be seen thing, and then immediately show him, and he burst fire out of his hands. I'm pretty sure he was straight up invisible, and this is just revealing this.
Right. Exactly. So the very last part of this of chapter 8 is we actually get a detailed version of Polly's backstory as well.
Yep. Oof.
And so we basically find out that yes, she did have her son, and her son, she was basically at work, and her son died in an apartment fire along with the babysitter.
Yep.
And this is something that she's never admitted to Alan or pretty much anyone. This has been a secret that she's kept her whole life. And there's a lot more to this. Like, there's a lot of back and forth about, like, between her and her parents about getting back to Castle Rock or whatever, and her wanting to stay in California. And I don't really know if there's anything in here that we really want to necessarily talk about, but it does go into detail about her backstory and why she doesn't really want to
Yeah,
talk
I
about
think the only thing I wanna point out is that what eventually gets her to move back is her father has cancer, she moves back, he passes away, and then her mom passes away not too long later. And that's what eventually gets her back in town.
Right. Although it's not 100% certain that actually is what happens, right? Because she talks to like her estranged grandmother at the funeral of her mom, basically, and she's like, "Yeah, you need to stop living in the past. You need to go find yourself. It doesn't matter where you go." And I think earlier in the book it even mentioned that Paulie had came back for a brief time and then left for a while and then came back.
Yeah, I think
Anyway,
so.
her grandmother's like, "This town is for you. Like, it was built for you, you for it. I see the way you look at strangers. that's a small town sort of thing to do. Like, this is where you belong. You don't have to stay here for now, but this is where you belong, whether you want to accept it or not.
Yep.
So,
And then that bit of that section ends with Paulie basically thinking like, I need to tell Alan the truth because she's, I believe, told Alan that her child died of SIDS.
right. Yeah.
And then somewhere in that chapter, I don't remember exactly where, we got a quick bit where Myrtle, which is Danford's wife, went into Needful Things and saw a doll she really liked. We didn't get any more details about what deal she made, but she's got a doll. And I'm going to straight up make a full-on string conspiracy board for next time to track who's owed favors for what.
Buy a big board.
Oh, I have several boards that I bought
a lot
for this
going on here.
podcast. Don't worry.
Right.
I've got several.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. So,
but yeah, that's the chapters. And you know what I gotta say? Despite the really uncomfortable sex scene, I am greatly enjoying this book. Like, to the point that I was wildly eager for tonight's recording to come so I could continue reading.
Yeah, right. I was sort of in that same boat. And again, there's just so many good things going on. And I think these are the types of books that I generally like by Stephen King a lot. Like, where there's just a lot going on and it's not focused on one or two people. You just sort of have a community getting together and you're like, oh man, like anything could happen at this point.
Right.
Like, so
And
yeah.
Unlike in Salem's Lot, where at this point in the book, we just knew a bunch about a lot of random people.
Right.
At this point, we know a bunch about a lot of random people, and we can feel the powder keg building.
Yeah,
like
right.
It's not just been, here's the foundational stuff you need to know, even though you don't really need to know all this because half these people are going to die off camera. But
yeah,
we're actually feeling this tension building, and I'm getting scared for how could this be resolved in any way that's even halfway okay? Because
you're right, because this is such an interesting villain, because Leland Gaunt has literally never had any indication at all that he wants to directly kill people, right? Or harm them. He's basically setting the town against itself.
Yeah, which is brilliant because we've got this protagonist who his biggest trauma is that he thinks he missed something and him missing that killed his wife. And now we've got this antagonist who isn't directly doing things. Like, he is making other people do things and feel ashamed of what they do so they'll never talk about it and it won't fall back on him. And I love what's being built. Like, they're really well matched. And unlike in Salem's Lot, when we've got these comparisons to like Holmes and Minecraft that only feel like they're there because we're told that these plans, like, I'm going to repeat my whole feelings on Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot really comes down to two different sides making elaborate plans and then telling themselves that they're so smart, and then all those plans immediately falling apart. No one in Salem's Lot does anything smart. And here it feels like we have a villain who is actually intelligent and making these complicated machinations. And I'm so excited and terrified it's all going to fall apart. Though if it falls apart by a shadow puppet giving him a blowjob, I'll be okay with that. 10 out of 10 would read again.
Yeah, right. And then we have the pleasure of watching the movie afterwards. So
yes, what was the Rotten Tomatoes rating on that you saw?
I'm very excited because I didn't even know. It was a surprise to me. Someone told me, they're like, "Yeah, so you're gonna watch the Needful Things movie," and I was like, "Oh wow, what?"
I didn't know either.
Didn't even know, and it has like a whopping like 31% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh, this is gonna be good.
I am
pumped.
So excited.
Okay. Anything else before we wrap this one up?
No, man. What are we reading next?
Next, we are reading chapters 9 through 11, which will bring us through the end of part 1.
Excellent.
Yeah, I am pumped. And then part 2 is called The Sale of the Century. It's gonna be good.
I have a feeling that's gonna something to do with Keaton, probably.
I'm leaning towards Paulie. That's my guess.
Well, I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. All right. I guess until next time, I've been Leland Galt, and oral sex gives me amnesia.
Right.
Hole in the Wall Book Club is a part of the Icynewyear Productions Network, and produced and edited by Anthony Sheets. The music in this episode is Supernatural Radio by Kevin MacLeod. There'll be a link to his license and website in the show notes. If you want to get a hold of us, tweet us at Icynewyear, or send an email to icynewyear@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to tell a friend, or leave us a review on your podcatcher of choice. Word of mouth and 5-star reviews really help us get out in front of more people, and let us expand and do more things. More information on the show can be found on icynewyear.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.